Hi everyone, this is Dave, and today I'm going to share with you a technique that I use for creating scalable buttons in Illustrator using the Appearance panel and graphic styles. The Appearance panel is essentially all of the styling properties for a shape in Illustrator. And so what I've been doing is creating buttons that are just a single shape with a series of attributes applied to them to give them this stylized look. These buttons are completely scalable, and they're easily turned into graphic styles so that you can quickly apply their styling over to other buttons in your document. So I'll show you a technique for creating buttons this way, and hopefully you can use it in your own workflow. What I do is essentially just make a black rectangle with no stroke. And this one I'm going to make 200 by 60 pixels. Click OK. I always make sure that I have the transform panel open and aligned to pixel grid selected. And that just makes sure that whole number values are used for both the position and the dimensions of this shape. It results in crisper previewing lines and effects in Illustrator. To round the corners, I'm going to use the round corners effect from within Effects Stylize. Pretty much everything that I'm going to be applying to the shape is either a fill, a stroke, or something from this effects menu. And that really works well when you're turning this appearance into a graphic style. So I'll go to round corners, and I'll just click OK for now. You can see that the round corner effect is actually added as an attribute to this shape. And you can just double click that effect in the appearance panel at any time and alter its properties. So I'm just going to make this 6 pixels. So the first thing I do is I fill the shape with a linear gradient. And I just work in gray for now because I'll apply the color as a separate fill later. That way you don't have to go in and individually tweak the gradient points for each color. The color, the gray I'm going to use is somewhere 40 on the brightness slider to 80 on the brightness slider. In this button that I've already created, you can see that I actually have 2 strokes around it. This darker outer stroke and then this lighter inner stroke, which gives it a sort of inner highlight or inner glow look. That darker stroke is actually a gradient, and it's much easier now that CS6 allows you to apply gradients to strokes. But I was doing this before CS6, and so I'll show you a technique for achieving a gradated stroke in CS5 or 4. Essentially what you do is you apply 2 fill attributes to the same shape, and you offset one of those fill attributes by the width of the stroke that you're trying to represent. So with that shape selected, I just have this fill here highlighted. And if I click on this little duplicate selected item icon, I get another fill with that same gradient applied. I'm going to select the bottom fill in the panel and just make it a little darker. I'll make it 30 on the brightness slider to around 70. And you can see it didn't really change the look of the shape at all. That's because the fill on top of it is hiding it. You can toggle visibility and see that if you turn off that fill that's on top, it's actually hiding it. So what I'm going to do is just go to Effect, Path, Offset Path. And if I offset that fill by a negative number, like -5, click Preview, you can see that it's actually just offsetting this top lighter gradient fill and revealing this darker fill in the background. So if I just offset it by 1 pixel, that's the same as having sort of a 1 pixel gradated stroke around it. In CS6, I can just select the shape, select the stroke attribute, and just apply a linear gradient to it. I'm going to make it, again, a little darker than the fill gradient, 30 on the brightness slider to 70. And then I'm just going to set the stroke to align stroke to inside of path. So both methods achieve virtually the same results. It's just a little easier in CS6. I'll delete the old version and just keep going with this other one. To get that lighter inner stroke, I just create a new stroke by coming to the Appearance panel and clicking Add New Stroke from the from the rollout menu in the corner. I'm going to make this stroke white, 1 pixel, and I'll again align it to the inside. This stroke is actually concealing the stroke behind it, so if I, within the appearance panel, just drag it, I can move it down underneath that darker outer stroke. And then I can just drop the opacity of just that stroke down to 20%. And that's pretty much it. Now the next thing I'm going to do is just apply a drop shadow. So if I, within the appearance panel, have to just make sure that I select path here so that it applies the drop shadow to the whole shape. And I go Effects, Stylize Drop Shadow. And I'm going to do a 50% opacity drop shadow. Offset 1 pixel on the y-axis. 0.5 blur. And that looks pretty good. So there you see the drop shadow effect is added. Now from here you can pretty much just combine and experiment with different effects and fills and strokes to create the button style that you prefer. For example, if you want to create a button that has some texture to it, you could just create another fill attribute. And here I've turned a pattern that I made earlier into a swatch. I can just select that pattern and drop its opacity down. And I have a patterned button. Maybe change it to multiply. I also have a noise texture that I just copied and pasted from Photoshop. And I'll show you, I can just increase the opacity on that and get this sort of textured button. To create a kind of glossy looking button like the example one, what I always did in the past was basically have a separate white highlight shape on top of this. And that was good, but then when you went to scale the button, you'd kind of lose control of the distance of the stroke, or have to readjust the corner radius or something like that. So what I do to contain it all within one shape is really just affect the gradient that fills this shape. If I come to the little gradient fill here and just click in the middle of the gradient slider to add a couple of points, I can just make those points a little lighter. Something like that. And when I get a kind of subtle difference there, I just set both of them to 50% on the location. Sometimes it's hard to get in there and actually move those sliders. 50% on this one. And you get a really crisp dividing line. And then lastly, if I want to apply color to this button, again, it's just another fill. And I can just select the color swatch and change its transparency to overlay. I'm working in RGB color space, of course. And then you see it's actually falling beneath that gray outer stroke. Just make sure you drag the color attribute up to the top of the panel. So there I have a blue button. So now what I can do after I've created a button style that I like is turn that style into a graphic style. If I select this shape, you see in the appearance panel, there's a little thumbnail next to path, and you can just drag that thumbnail into the graphic styles panel, and you get a little swatch. If you don't have graphic styles open, you can open that under Window, Graphic Styles. So this little swatch here is basically a packaging of all of these attributes that we just created from this shape. And it's easy to apply to new shapes now. So if I come down to these other shapes I have here, I can just click on that little graphic style swatch that we created, and it applies all the attributes that we defined for that button earlier. These shapes essentially link to this graphic style. So you see if I have this star one selected, it says Path Graphic Style. You can actually even double click on that swatch and give it a name like Blue Button. So you'll see when I select that shape, it's Path Blue Button. If I make any modifications to the appearance attributes, like turning off round corners, it instantly breaks the link to that graphic style and just becomes a shape with an appearance defined for that shape. This is kind of an important concept to remember with this, because essentially what I do is I use this graphic styles mapping to easily update the styles within a document. So if I decided that I wanted this button to actually have this more kind of green fill to it, I could just drag down a new graphic style swatch here and switch over buttons that way. Or if I drag down the thumbnail and hold down Option, I can replace the graphic style I just created. This will basically update all instances of this blue button to now have this kind of greenish hue to it. So these two shapes that were still linked to that graphic style receive the update. The shape that I'd broken the link to is just its own kind of shape with appearance defined, but I can just easily apply over that button style. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes of the idea. I'm just going to drag the styling for each of these buttons into this menu so that I have a variety of button stylings defined. So what you can do is essentially work on your buttons external to whatever comp you're working on. And once you get some styles that you like, within the graphic styles panel, if you open up the little rollout menu, you can save a graphic style library and then just save an AI file of the button styles. And when you're within your comp, it's thinking, here I just have a sort of simulated sample comp. You go to that same graphic styles menu and go open graphic style, other library, and then I can just select that document that I just saved. So here I have all the button styles that I just defined, and now it's just as easy as selecting the buttons and applying styles to them. So that's pretty much it. I find it extremely useful. You can have all of the buttons defined as the same style or two, make a change to just the graphic style, and then when you update that, it basically updates all the buttons in your document. So hopefully this will save you some time and you can find it to be useful in your own work. Thanks.